Welcome to the first day of the rest of your life. My name is Andy Zaremba, and I'm recording the intro to this podcast today by a river on the North Shore. And of course, you can see if you're watching it on YouTube that it is a rainy, gray Vancouver afternoon, but that's what we get this time of year. And for today's episode, I got to interview the great Dr. Dan. Dr. Dan Engle's joined us on the podcast for a second time. And for those of you that don't know him, Dr. Dan is a certified in psychiatry and in neurology. And we dove into some pretty awesome subjects. We talked a little bit about his book, the Concussion Treatment Manual. We dove into the use of ketamine for the treatment of depression, and also some other tools of transformation that Dr. Dan definitely believes in, one of which happens to be flotation therapy. And of course, if you don't know what flotation therapy is, as usual, we'll recommend the video, What is Floating? If you're on YouTube, you can just type in What is Floating, and we have a 7-minute video explaining what flotation therapy is all about. But it's a great way to relieve stress, calm down the chatter in the mind, go internal, see what's going on for yourself, relieve bodily pain. There's a lot of really great benefits to flotation therapy, all backed up by research. So if you want to check that out, check out the What is Floating video. And if you'd like to give floating a try, you can use the promo code VancouverReal, and that will get you a 20% discount on a single float. But I'm really happy that Dr. Dan took the time to join us on the podcast again. I feel like he's a bit of a kindred spirit to myself and my brother Mike, and he's done a little bit of work in Peru at the same place that we go to, and he's just an all-around amazing human being. And he's going to be actually joining us in studio in Vancouver at the end of February, which I'm really looking forward to, because obviously Skype podcasts are not the optimal way to record an interview, but we'll take what we can get with when someone like Dr. Dan offers his time to us. But without further ado, I give you Dr. Dan Engle. Welcome back to another episode of Vancouver Real. My name is Andy Zaremba, and with me on a Skype call today is Dr. Dan Engle. Welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, it's good to be back with you guys today.
You did a podcast a couple of years back with my brother, and I listened to it, and you dove into some of the work that we had jointly done with our maestro, Don Howard, at Spirit Quest Sanctuary. And I thought I'd like to just get an update on what you've been working on the last couple of years, since it's been a while since we've connected. And actually, I connected with a buddy of yours, Gunter, down at Spirit Quest in July. And that's sort of what prompted me to reach out to you again. Let's have this conversation. So what have you been up to in the past few years, and what's on your radar, and what have you been working on?
Yeah, the last few years have been an accelerated path. I suppose I would say it's been paralleled with deep personal work, deep work in community, and a lot of professional work and acceleration. So probably 2.5 years or so now, I was living in Austin, finishing up the Concussion Repair Manual, launched that last year. That went great. And then subsequently built out a program called BOLD, Brain Optimization and Lifestyle Design, and came on board with a center called Revive, here outside of Boulder, between Boulder and Denver, where our focus there is in neurologic recovery, primarily from concussion, traumatic brain injury, stroke, like the acquired injuries. Yep. We do a little bit in the developmental disability space with kids, and in the neurodegenerative conditions with elderly, but most of our work is in the adult population with acquired injury. And that's just been over the last 8 months. But in that time between Austin and living here in Boulder, I was living in the Bay Area for about 1.5 years. And I was part of a conscious community there, really going deep into relational dynamics and just getting a sense of, what does it look like for us to live really deeply connected conscious lives with those around us that we love and want to share life with. So it was a house with 8 adults and 4 kids, and like a deep immersion into the social architecture that is required for successful small tribe experiences to be flourishing. we've studied with a lot of other communities globally where there may be 30 members up to 300 members. But ours is a little different, trying to do it at such a small scale and riding those waters and navigating different dynamics and different changes in the relational construct. So it taught us all a whole lot.
I can imagine. I believe you were speaking with Aubrey. Oh, and speaking of Aubrey, actually, I'm part of the Fit for Service Mastermind as well. So we're going to be in the same space. And you're actually doing a little bit of facilitation within that group as well, correct?
Yeah.
What were you doing with them?
It'll probably be a variety of co-creations in the different segments. Aubrey and I are still getting a sense of how deep he wants to bring me on board to help co-facilitate some of that content. But essentially, what he was planning to do for Fit for Service is essentially the same map that I use for clients. And when we looked at our two maps, we're like, oh, well, this is a natural fit. And, are super tight. So it's going to be fun to do that. And as we get in, if we're looking at like systems and historical systems of working people through an arc of a process, many of the systems that have been codified work through a cardinal direction or like a medicine wheel, right? So you've got like 4 different primary points on that wheel. And if you're working at it in a leveled system with human experience, you've got body, mind, heart, and soul. Yes. Some people say soul or spirit, body, mind, heart, and spirit. And then when you're working people through body, like orientation, focus, and then mental, and then heart, and then soul or spirit, there's a focus and a like orientation towards the optimization strategies. But we also recognize that we don't just work in silos. So we're working through that whole system kind of concurrently with one another while people are getting just more and more tuned in to essentially who they are and what they're here to do, hence the name Fit for Service. So it's a super tight orientation for both of us.
The name definitely resonates with myself because I think it might have been inspired by a fellow teacher of ours, Mr. Don Howard down at Spirit Quest Sanctuary.
Yeah.
One of the phrases he commonly uses when people are engaging people down there with him. Interestingly enough, one of the people I've connected with locally.
I'm gonna send my cat out real quick. Okay. Yeah, I know.
I can talk a little bit about
yeah, okay.
the cat situation. We interviewed Paul Sells, his dog was barking in the background the entire time. He had to deal with his dog, which is interesting. So I'm having animal issues on the podcast lately, which is kind of
yeah, I know. We love our little animal friends. Totally.
But one of the gentlemen up here who's part of the Fit for Service, this really interesting guy named Peyton, I just connected with him on Tuesday. He's actually opening the first legal psychedelic clinic here in BC up in Squamish. And he's going to be, we're going to start with ibogaine. And also Trevor Miller, who is on the board of Mass Canada, will be part of that. He's the ibogaine facilitator. And also, I believe they're going to bring in Gabor Mate to work with them as well. And he's also working with Dennis McKenna on his connection with Peru. So this is just like, when I saw this guy, I actually used to do jiu-jitsu with him for years. And I'm like, oh, he joined Aubrey's Fit for Service Mastermind. And and that was part of my motivation for joining, because I figured like it would be a pretty high caliber group. And so far from that first connection, it's been pretty epic. So looking forward to that group for sure. But
yeah, totally. Who's the guy that's opening up the Squamish Center?
His name's Peyton. I won't say his last name. And he, so he's working with a guy who currently does ibogaine, named Trevor Miller. He's actually on the board for Mass Canada as well. Yeah. And apparently he's talking to Gabor as well about backing a retreat center locally. And the funny thing is, I had a half-hour conversation with him, so I can't really say exactly how they're doing it, but they figured out a way to be able to offer psilocybin legally as well, with the approval of Health Canada, which is pretty amazing. It's like this sort of some sort of health permit application that they got granted access to, and then eventually they're going to be able to do psilocybin therapy as well, which is incredible. So it's really cool. I thought that was going to be years away, but he's going full out with it this year. So maybe you'll be up here for that and engaging with them in some way. Dennis will be moving here in the new year, I believe. So it's interesting. Vancouver is always this little hub for this kind of work, which is pretty interesting.
Yeah.
Yes. But
Absolutely.
but getting back to your stuff, well, first of all, people want to connect you. It's drdanengle.com and fullspectrummedicine.com. But one of the things you mentioned when you did your introduction was the concussion repair manual and dealing with the traumatic brain injury. And as you know, like this is a huge problem right now within professional sports, within the NFL, NHL, UFC. All these guys dealing with head trauma, especially in NHL in Canada. A lot of hockey players deal with that, and it's really come up to the forefront, and especially with like degenerative neural conditions like any kind of dementia and things like that. People really do have a passion for this sort of thing now. And maybe you could walk us through that book a little bit, and what are some of the key areas that you found to help, do repair in brain trauma victims?
Yeah, it's a good question. So two areas of focus for me are in psychedelic medical research and in neurologic restoration and recovery. And it was mostly because I had a half a dozen really bad concussions myself. And this was my last really significant one, was almost 20 years ago now. And at that time, there wasn't a whole lot of talk in the space about neurologic recovery from concussion. So back then, our diagnostics in Western medicine were really good, but our therapeutics were crap. And they're marginally better now. But what it did is it stimulated me to get into the lab, spend 20 years and $250,000 just researching what worked and what didn't work. And so I ended up putting together that into just various protocols I was working with pro athletes on, and that essentially became the book. So I wanted to write the book as a user's guide. So it's both written from the perspective of the layperson, so you can understand the material, as well as the clinician. And it's got, I don't know, something like 600 or so different resources and studies verifying the data for each of the modalities that we put in there. So that was the backstory to it. And then we've been proving more and more of that model at our place in Revive, where people come for 2-week deep dives, essentially to have an immersive experience with diagnostics and therapeutics to see how much we can improve them in a 2-week process, and then help them continue to improve when they go home. So that's kind of like where the material came from and how we're using it in the clinical setting. In the at-home setting, which is where most people are at, and where we need actually even more of the kind of codified coaching program to be able to work people through a system that they're having support. Because when you get your brain knocked, and whether it's the downstream effects from stroke or concussion itself, and you have the post-concussive syndrome, it's really hard to organize and track and be focused, attention, concentration, the follow-through, and the objective orientation to be able to track your symptoms and make sure that things are moving well. So you need to have somebody like a trainer or a coach who's working you through a system while they're also helping to maintain the objective data on whether or not things are actually improving or not. Some of that's at home available through mobile apps like Lumosity, Elevate, Peak, Brain HQ. There's some different web-based apps where people can do cognitive testing and see if they're getting better. So you need a baseline, and then you have an intervention, and then you test again against your previous baseline, right? So maybe you do a therapeutic for 2 or 4 weeks, really get in there, and then follow up. You don't necessarily want to test every day, because you can habituate to the test, and then you can learn the test, and you'll get better on the test, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're better cognitively overall. So once you have a protocol, then you work that protocol for 2 to 4 weeks, test again, and see how you do. So the manual is essentially based in what are the available protocols that people can put together. So the first portion of that book is based in what I call primal or primary therapies or technologies. And these are the basic building blocks of life. Flotation is in there, right? Water therapy and just floating and being able to restore and recover the entire neurologic system. Flotation is a great accelerator for that, right? As well as other things like diet, light therapy, And that goes for anything from like being outside and getting good UV exposure, or seasonal affective disorder, or low-level laser therapy, and actually using localized laser technologies to up-level ATP production and cellular energy and regeneration and these kind of things. Pulse electromagnetic fields you put in there because frequency technologies are a basic building block for life. Oxygen therapy is basic building block for life. So I essentially put the first chapter as like, okay, what makes life do what it does? And how can we maximize those technologies to help the brain heal even better? And all of those have great data for brain recovery. And the opportunity that we have now as a medical paradigm is to put all these available technologies into one umbrella system, codify the protocol, track the data, and scale it out. So we've done that with Revive. And you mentioned Gunter in the center that we're going to open up in Austin, which is what we're going to be doing in the psychology rehabilitation space.
And also, well, yeah, but the flotation therapy for sure. I know because people also when they have concussion, they have light sensitivity. That's a pretty big one, right? Like, and it's going to essentially reduced environment actually. That can be definitely very therapeutic to anyone who's experiencing concussion.
Flotation therapy is one of the best things to do for people immediately after concussion.
Yeah, sure. And I don't know if there's been a lot of research on that in particular. Have you been up to date on any of the contemporary float research that's going on with Dr. Justin Feinstein out of LIBOR, the Laureate Institute for Brain Research? Have you followed that at all?
I haven't been following his stuff too close, but my understanding he's essentially leading the industry.
Oh yeah, for sure. He's focusing on anxiety disorders, and he just finished his first round of clinical research, and it got fully published and everything. And the results are extremely promising. He put through 50 subjects through controlled studies where they had basically the control was an individual was at in a zero gravity chair at home in a relaxed environment that somebody could create at home versus a float pool and then even a float room. And they saw significantly differences in changes of state anxiety from the control versus floating, and across all 50 subjects. So they're really testing it for the treatment of state anxiety. In fact, they found that the flotation effects actually lasted longer than, say, anti-anxiety medication like maybe a benzodiazepine. Like he said, the benzos would like reduce anxiety for say 4 to 6 hours, and they found that floating actually kept it down for 20 hours without taking anything. And if people want to dive deeper into that, check out Justin Feinstein Float Conference 2017 or 2018, and he goes into much more detail about the research that they've done. But it looks really promising for people with anxiety disorders.
Yeah. I've been really excited to see somebody take the initiative in the float space and start codifying the research protocols to prove what we already know experientially is that it works.
Yes, exactly. Well, we've known for a long time that it works. Now he's actually getting the data to back up. In fact, he was just emailed my brother because we were going to have it on the podcast as well. He just got approved for funding from the NIH, so they're going to continue his research because they really like what they're doing, what he's doing in treatment of anxiety. Because I think it's something like he quoted like 40 million people in the U.S. at any given time are experiencing some sort of anxiety disorder, and of course that rotates. People go in and out of that state, but it is an ongoing problem. And I think, if anything could treat it. Are you still there?
Yeah, I was just rebooting my video because it got frozen.
Okay, good. Okay, you're back. Perfect. Yeah, anything that can treat anxiety disorders without medication, I think is a win.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So now, what are you going to be doing specifically at this center, the center that you and Gunter are going to be opening down in Austin?
Yeah, so what we do at Revive is essentially focused on neurologic recovery. The center in Austin is going to be focusing on psychological recovery. And so what does it look like when we codify the protocols that help support anxiety, depression, PTSD, and then secondarily, addiction and pain? And those systems with flotation, with ketamine, with a variety of other different neurotherapeutics and functional medicine orientation to be able to look at people's physiology, to understand what are all their metrics objectively in the physiologic space, in the psychologic space, gain all of that data when people first come in, and then follow them through a series of treatments and be able to continue to prove that model. So essentially what we're doing is we're seeing this massive shift now in healthcare. Allopathic healthcare has dominated the space over the last 100 years. The last 10 years has been more and more of a movement, 10 to 15 years, towards functional medicine, integrative medicine, holistic medicine, which is great because that looks at a larger aspect of the self and not just like quadranting, like cardiac, like the heart and the lungs and the kidneys into these like little compartments. What does it look like to address the whole person on all of those levels, body, mind, heart, and soul? And what does it look like to bring in the contemporary process that we're all going through in this transformational culture, right? We're more and more connected to people globally than we've ever been, but we're less and less connected heart to heart, face to face, skin to skin, touch to touch, communally. Right? Our communities are more and more stretched thin because of the pace of our society, because of the distraction and just like the quickness of our media, of the movement of information, and the fact that we haven't genetically advanced our neurology to be able to continue to match the accelerated speed of technology. So we're finding these like, stretched thin experiences sociologically, psychologically, that's leading to a good portion of these epidemics, the 5 primary epidemics in psychology and psychiatry that are happening right now: anxiety, depression, PTSD, addiction, and pain. And when we put together these transformational experiences into an expression of the medical implications of these experiences for people's healing, we're now codifying the transformational culture, right? Which is like part of what Jamie Wheal and Stephen Kotler identified in Stealing Fire. Great book, really speaking about this transformational culture that we're living in. And we're at this precipice of the entire new translation of that transformational culture into the medical codified process and the field of transformational medicine itself opening up. We're at the doorway of that right now.
I think that's so interesting. I don't want to keep talking about floating necessarily, but the one thing that came to mind is I just watched the video sort of prep for this interview, and we talked about what we know what happened in float tank is the activation of the parasympathetic nervous system, and they can really measure that through heart rate variability, right? So as you see that improvement in heart rate variability, that is a good key indicator that your parasympathetic is being activated. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. But it's interesting how you're combining these modalities, right? And you mentioned something really interesting that you'd be doing in the clinic is with ketamine therapy. And I've heard lately that that could be a potential treatment for depression. Can you dive into that a little bit more?
Yeah. Ketamine's been used for the last 30 years for treatment-resistant depression. Its history is as an anesthetic, actually from the veterinarian field as a horse tranquilizer. And then it got switched over to human trials and human surgical procedures. And the medical community noticed that it was very effective at helping people get sedated and anesthetized for a surgical procedure without lowering their respiratory drive. So that means you can get deep into anesthesia without having people need to be on a ventilator. And so that's why it's used a lot in the field for EMTs and emergency medicine. Also, when that started to be used more and more in the human trials and human surgery, the surgical community noticed that people with a long history of depression would come out of ketamine-supported anesthesia with an improvement oftentimes in their depression scores. And that was without any therapy, just as a reboot. And so it started dawning on people like, maybe there's something that ketamine's doing that's interrupting some kind of process in the mind that's supporting depression recovery. So people started using it more and more, but it was still fairly underground, not underground necessarily. It wasn't very widely used up until maybe the last half a dozen years. Like maybe 6-7 years ago, there were less than 10 ketamine clinics in the country, and now there are close to 300, or at least 300 advertised ketamine providers, and that's just in the U.S. I was speaking at the ketamine conference last month on the neurologic recovery aspects of ketamine, because we use it at Revive. Because often we work also with a lot of vets that come back from war and are like quote unquote blown up, and when that happens, there's a TBI or traumatic brain injury effect. There's a mind injury effect called PTSD or post-traumatic stress disorder. Oftentimes, there's also, as related to that, depression, because the master hormone, the brain, like the pituitary, hypothalamus, pineal, particularly with the pituitary, it starts to downregulate. You get something called PAN, which means whole, hypo, low pituitaryism. So globally low pituitary function. And that means the pituitary now can't tell the thyroid how to work, the testes or gonads how to work very well. It affects the rest of the body globally. So you see the low kind of hormone markers as a result, and that can oftentimes, when your hormones are really low, can lead to depression. It can also lead to anxiety if you have like a counter effect. But particularly with TBI, PTSD, depression, and pain, oftentimes veterans or people that go through a variety of different combat sports have a variety of different injuries and they have chronic pain. When you have all four of those working at the same time, ketamine can come in and work at each of those individually, but then accelerate their experience, because when it works on all of those together, you get a massive relief of that suffering, of the mental suffering and the physiologic suffering, because ketamine is an anesthetic, so it helps with pain. So when we see, for example, there was a woman that came in that had a stroke in the thalamus, which is where the body governs, where the brain governs the body's pain receptors. And as a result of that stroke, she was constantly firing pain signals 24/7. So she was in chronic pain 24/7 and was about to commit suicide. We didn't know that until after we gave her treatment. And her husband said, holy cow, if this wasn't going to work, we were talking about like what her exit strategy was going to be. She came in and we were going to give her stem cells, but she couldn't get in a comfortable enough position to get the stem cells, so we had to use ketamine. And it was the first time in 10 years she had been pain-free. And so that's just an example of like this intervention that can come in and just give enough of a reset to the system, create more space to be able to oftentimes get into the deeper work. And so ketamine works at the address of the ego, the default mode network, because it works as a pattern interrupt. It also helps the mind relax enough to be able to allow that subconscious material to come onto the screen of the mind and to start working through it, so it can be an accelerant of psychotherapy. So for a variety of reasons, ketamine works really well with treatment-resistant depression.
The parallels with that, as well as the psychedelics, and even potentially floating with opening up that doorway, like you said, to deeper work. I was wondering if you could elaborate more on. So it's like this isn't necessarily the cure. It's not necessarily getting at the root cause of what's causing these issues for people, because you have to do that deeper work. Can you elaborate more on what that is?
Yeah, that's where the psychedelic medicines, there's a variety of different ways to get into the deeper subconscious material. And the ego is based on survival. It helps us navigate the world, stay safe, stands for two things, danger and opportunity, right? Like the Buddha said, there are things that we crave and there are things that we are, averse to. And so it's constantly reading the field. Well, in the float tank, you finally have an opportunity to stop doing that, as well as to gate gravity, visual stimulus itself, auditory input, proprioceptive input. All of that starts to relax, and now you have the opportunity for the brain to actually become more aware and the subconscious to have more space to bring that material out onto the surface. So yeah, floating, excellent foundation for everything that we do, including meditation, including journey work, including medicine work. And so there's a lot of other ways that we can get into the deeper material, that we can help massage those fear centers in the ego to relax enough to bring up our core wounds. Because the ego is defending against those things that we interpreted as the biggest danger points and potential annihilation when we were kids. Because, you know, as kids, we just think everything's about us. Sometimes as adults, we think that too. So as little kids, it's like, I think everything's about me. Particularly if you look at toddlers, like 2 to 4, they think everything's about them and that they're responsible for everything. That doesn't end at 4, but that's where you see that a lot. And they navigate a lot of like the no, you know, I'm testing my boundaries. I'm seeing how powerful I am. I'm seeing how much I have control over my environment or not. And when there's a dangerous thing or a traumatic experience, they believe, we've all done this, we all believe at that age that we're responsible for it. It was like we're the result of it. So that's where a lot of guilt comes in, shame comes in, and a lot of identification, whether or not love is safe or bonding is safe, whether or not I am worthy of receiving love, able to receive love, able to give love, able to presence one another. That's where a lot of our mirror neurons start to really solidify as well. So you get a lot of this like formative psychological structure of the psyche of who we become later solidified when we're very young. And we don't even connect the language center with the memory center in the brain until we're like 5, 6 years old. That's at the time that we start going to school. So what we learn, what we see and what we learn, we can put into memory and retrieve that and like, you know, put it on the test, so to speak. So psychotherapy is hard to get to the earlier stuff because we haven't even languaged the stuff that happened before 5 years old, oftentimes. And we oftentimes don't have a narrative. So we can get into that deeper material, like hypnotherapy is really good. If you work with a good hypnotherapist and they create a safe environment to be able to slowly just relax into the subconscious material and allow that to come up. The medicines work in that same kind of way. They allow the mind to have enough of a different perspective, particularly with that default mode network, and the amygdala and the fear centers. And when the fear centers relax and more of an objective understanding and appreciation and like observational platform comes online, then we can oftentimes become more intimate, curious, and learning about those core issues. And those are our biggest teachers. Those are the things that are the biggest kind of influences of our life. So we don't necessarily want to just like cure it and be done with it. We want to actually become more intimate with it. We want to become more connected to it, to validate it and all of those parts of ourselves that are connected to it. And then as we do that, we become more whole. And that's what the entire integration process after a medicine journey is all about. It's integrating the experience to make that experience workable for life, but it's also in association with the supported process of becoming more integrated as a whole person with all aspects of myself online and available.
Interesting. So when you've gone in and you've identified some of these past wounds, maybe shadow aspects of yourself that have come up and bubbled up from these different modalities that you're talking about, what does the process of integration look like? So we've identified them. How do we integrate them so we can potentially heal those past wounds or reframe them or potentially integrate that shadow part of ourselves? What's the steps look like to move somebody to become that more whole version of themselves?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's where for me the biggest opportunity lies. If there wasn't an experience of breakthrough, then there wouldn't be anything to integrate. So yes, the experience is necessary. But if you can't make it real and workable, then oftentimes it can actually leave people destabilized. Right. Because now you've like brought all that shit up to the surface and you haven't done anything with it. Yeah. It's like your toilet backed up and now there's just shit everywhere and you haven't called in the cleaners. Yeah. So the integration process, number one, the biggest invitation for people in the experience itself, but this also relates to integration, is to drop all expectation. Have full faith. If you know that the person or the process or the center that you're working with is trustworthy, and they have been vetted, and they've got good, clean energy, high integrity, they know what they're doing, they know how to create a safe container and facilitate deep work. If you know that's the case, then the opportunity is to completely surrender, trust the process, and have faith that the experience that's unfolding is the one that is exactly meant for you at this time.
Yes, I could totally relate to what you're saying with the work that I've done at Spirit Quest. And I know you've been down there before as well. And that's the only place I've done one ceremony in BC, but other than like the proper deep work that I've done before, the retreat center, it's the only place I would confidently send somebody. You know, unfortunately, John Howard's having his health concerns right now and might be on a limited schedule next year. But it's so vital to trust that place and to make sure it's a super reputable place. And like, I don't know if you know any other places that you would trust and recommend for that, because people ask me that frequently. And I'm like, oh, yeah, I'd send you a Spirit Quest, but you know they're not operating right now. Is there any other places that you know of that you would trust?
Yeah, the three places that I tend to orient people to: Spirit Quest, right? Because not only are they working with ayahuasca, they're working with San Pedro, and that's Don Howard's just genius. He's the living lineage holder of San Pedro medicine, at least in the West. And super beautiful center, super clean medicine, great experiences. A real similar center in its style and its like the experience of it, the huts that you're in, the kind of like, you know, immersive experience, like being down in it because it's also in the jungle. It's called the Temple of the Way of Light.
Okay.
Yeah.
Kenya Mate on. She's an integration specialist at the temple as well. So I've never been there, so I wouldn't recommend a place that I've never been to, but I've heard that one being reputable as well.
Yeah, I know Matthew and Clara, the founders, really well. They're good friends. And I met Tanya through them, and she came on board to start working with them to solidify their integration program. So another reason that I orient people down to the temple, because it's really important to have an integration program built into the work. So you don't have to go like fishing for integration support. And the temple has seen, I think they've seen the most number of people of any ayahuasca center in the world, somewhere close to 5,500 or 6,000, and their success rates are amazing. I've worked with them in a consultant role for a number of years, and I've just been really consistently connected to their support staff, the way they facilitate. They're always up-leveling their facilitators because, you know, we're always going through our own process of recovery and healing. And it's important to have the best facilitators on staff because if you're working with a facilitator that hasn't worked through their own stuff, then their stuff can get programmed into the space, just like a therapist, right? You want to work with the best psychotherapist you can, so that person is as neutral as possible and knows how to help you as best possible. I tend to, these days when I work with clients, I'm not as much of a therapist as I am a coach, because I think there's a way to do both. And coaches are in a more active orientation. They tend to be more oriented towards positive psychology and what's going well and what your goals are and how to identify those goals. Therapists are oftentimes looking at what's wrong and historically, like where the traumas come from, and both are helpful. We have to be able to get people current, working through their trauma in order to be clearly available to see their best future potential, like the most clear vision board, so to speak. Oftentimes, we will try to find and consume more and more to fill up the empty hole or to anesthetize the early trauma if it's not been dealt with. So that's why that's one of the reasons we live in such a consumptive culture. We're constantly consuming, constantly throwing stuff away, getting more, throwing away, getting more, throwing away, and assuming throwing away means that it's somewhere safe, and it's not, it doesn't go anywhere. It's just out of my sight. So this is part of the work that we do in the medicine space, is to help us and, individuals, us and everyone, try and get as current as possible with as much experience of belonging and sufficiency. So reconnecting the social architecture of safe bonding, feeling connected to a community, a family, a tribe of some sort, and also having the internal experience of sufficiency, which means that I am enough. My life is enough. I am good enough. What I'm doing is awesome. I'm an important part of the entire orchestra of humanity, just as anybody else is. So I'm in a place of empowerment. And from a place of sufficiency and empowerment, my internal reference point tends to be intrinsically focused towards my goals of fulfillment versus extrinsically, which means I'm not looking outside to gain more, to fill me up and make me feel better. I'm feeling strong and empowered from the inside. So it's a big shift. It's one of the reasons that therapists are moving more towards like a coaching arena or a hybrid possibility. So coming back to the temple, they have an integration program built in to their process, which is great. And the third center that I orient people towards is Rhythmia. And I was actually just having tea this morning with one of the Rhythmia co-founders, Brandy. Her and her husband founded Rhythmia, and they've been really crushing it, so to speak, on the market. More and more people going down, more and more people having positive experiences. I think they've seen like close to 4,000 people in a fairly short period of time. And I understand their program is just getting better and better. The maestros and maestras that they work with are from Colombia and have been in the space for multi-generational family lines. And they're promoted by Michael Beckwith, and they have a good medical director. And so they've got a lot of good things in place. So if I'm looking at centers who's doing good medicine where it's safe and they have some kind of integration program, those are kind of like the targeted orientations. I tend to like more of the immersive experience myself. Like I like to go into a hut and be by myself with the medicines. Most people aren't like that. Most people are going to be more comfortable in a social arena. And Rhythmia is more of like a retreat kind of resort versus like the temple and the sanctuary are more like a retreat kind of like jungle immersion experience. I don't know if that's a fair way to describe it, but they both do good work. I think it's just more like, what's your more comfortable orientation if you were to look at what's going to be an easier fit for you while you're going through deep work.
Right. Yeah. Well, thank you for those recommendations. People ask me on this podcast quite often about where to send people. So those are some 3 solid ones. And you actually did a very intensive immersion several years ago now, where you were doing ayahuasca ceremonies 6 nights a week for a while, and you actually said doing it that frequently destabilized. It's interesting because like when you do these stints at Spirit Quest, you'll do like 4 to 5 ceremonies, and I find that that's like a good cycle of work. And I usually come back and I'm like, okay, I got a lot of stuff to handle now. I'm good. But I couldn't even imagine diving into an immersion like that. Can you maybe share a little bit about that experience?
Yeah, when I was first introduced to ayahuasca, it just completely opened me up. And I knew immediately that was going to be a massive part of my path. So I was running a clinic in Portland at the time, 12 years ago, and gradually started to make my way down to the jungle. Lived in an ashram for a couple of years just to kind of get ready, and got rid of everything, got down to a backpack, moved down to the jungle, and I went down an apprenticeship path. Ended up working with a few different teachers, did a variety of different DFS, lived there for about a year and a few months. And it was deep. Just in a hut, no running water, no electricity, no other gringos, just pretty immersed. And at the height of that apprenticeship training, we were working 6 nights a week. And you just get more and more comfortable, like being in the unknown, more available to be in the discomfort, I suppose. But I had a lot to integrate when I moved back. And it was clear So I was so clear that was my path. I didn't plan on coming back. I didn't have an idea to come back. I didn't really want to. I was so connected to that process.
Were you thinking
And
of
then,
facilitating at that time, like maybe going the route of becoming an ayahuasquero?
I didn't really have a target goal. I didn't have, some people do, like, and I can understand it because, people are looking for their calling and they find ayahuasca and they're like, oh, I want to do that thing. It was more like I had been a physician and I was just getting completely recodified internally. My entire identification system, my entire worldview platform, internally referenced, everything got peeled away. And so through my later stages of the dietas and my later months, it was clear that if I was going to be of best service, it wasn't going to be hanging out in a hut my whole life, but it was probably going to be in a bridging kind of education advocacy position. So I eventually came back. But my integration was hard because, like you said, when you do so much work and you don't integrate it, you pile up that integration.
Right.
It's kind of like going so long without sleep, and then when you finally sleep, you're going to have to catch up for a while. So I lived in a tent for a year in pretty much isolation when I first moved back to the States, just because I was like a fish out of water.
Yeah.
I couldn't identify with the pace, how fast everything moves, how kind of like abrupt people are, how much we consume, how little care we think about the earth and the coming generations, and the fact that we are consistently making choices against our own survival, like as a species, as a whole. And we're going through a massive shift in all of our major institutions. The political institution, educational, agricultural, medical, financial, social, all of those institutions are in rapid flux and change. So all of that was just like, what the heck is happening? And it took a while for me to land back down, but it also helped me really appreciate the necessary place for integration.
Right. Yeah, I can imagine coming back from an experience like that. It is tough. I mean, and for me, it was like being okay with, part of it was just being okay with all those things you brought up, and being like, okay, this is the situation right now. We don't have to, we don't have to accept it and like it, but it's like this is what's happening, right? And I feel like one thing I really liked about what you talk about is that you're really a practitioner of the work. Like, you're not just going out and prescribing all of this stuff to people. You've actually gone in and done it. You've lived the work, for example. Why do you think that you have been such a seeker in your life? It seems like there's some people that really are called to doing this. I'm one of them. Like, I've done tons of personal development work, of course, yoga and floating, meditation, and plant medicine work, and group work, like group therapy work, almost in a sense. Why do you think some people are really called to exploring those tools of transformation, maybe? Where people are happy just sort of, keeping it status quo and just going along with life?
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's a great question. I think it's an individual and a collective process. I think there are some of us that are individually at a personality construct or a constitutional makeup are more adventure seekers, are more pushing the boundaries. Like in the tribe, like Terrence McKenna has this great definition of the shaman. The shaman is that person in the tribe that goes to the edge of the known, jumps off, has an experience, comes back, and tells people what happened. So there are going to be people, and that's evolutionarily advantageous for us to have people in the community that are consciously and consistently looking for the next thing.
Yes.
Like, what does this thing do? And like maybe we're more novelty seeking. And also, I think it's a part of the collective process that we're all going through, because there's so much crisis happening in humanity right now. In many ways, we have it better than we've ever had it, right? In some ways, you could say we have less war, we have less pestilence, we have less famine, we have more access to information electronically and globally than something like, we have more in this little cell phone. I have more mobile information than the president had 10 years ago. Yeah, something crazy. So we're going through all of these changes and shifts. And if we're oriented towards leaning into it and learning from it, then we can leverage that crisis as a prelude to our transformation. Right? Crisis precedes transformation every time. Crisis is what motivates us. It's what gets us off of the couch and gets us into action. And we can use that as an opportunity. We just have to take ownership of it. And we have to keep ourselves in the driver's seat of our own lives, the captains of our own ship, regardless of what's happened. Full and radical ownership. What's here is mine to work with right now. It may not have come from me. A lot of times people, myself included, in the medicine space will realize that a lot of what we're working on and working through and healing didn't come from us. It came from our families. Transgenerational trauma, transgenerational programming from our parents and our grandparents. Just 2 generations ago, our ancestors were coming out of world wars where there was massive trauma that gets codified into our psyche. Right? So we're healing all of that. So I'm of the belief that there's going to be those of us on the front line that are using these new novel technologies to heal ourselves, to be fit for service, as well as to honor our ancestors and heal the past so that we can come current, live in the best way that we can, and actually try to offer something better to our coming generations than what we found ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's so interesting. I've often thought about that too, because we think, oh, World War II happened like 60, 70 years ago, like 1944, 45, it ended, I believe. And we think, oh, that's so long ago, right? But that was like just a rift in like humanity that had probably never been seen before, or anything like that. And it's like that. How could something like that not be passed on intergenerational? Like it's impossible for it not to. And I like how you said we're really working through that, and potentially this, that massive period of pain is what's giving us the catalyst to do this transformation or work with this transformation that we're in now. And from your perspective, what do you think are the biggest problems that are facing humanity at the moment?
Yeah, that's another really good question. I don't know if I've ever been asked that question. Number one, I think we are outpacing our intimacy. And what I mean by that is we're moving at such an accelerated rate in our day-to-day activity. We're not deeply, intimately connected with ourselves or with those that are closest to us or our communities or the planet, right? So it's easy to hear, like, if I listen to the first 5 minutes of NPR, it's all about like so-and-so blew up so-and-so because, this peace treaty fell through. And it's just it's so much trauma, and there's so much information, and there's so much speed of information. And I can easily just get kind of numb to that, and I can get just stuck in my own silo and doing more and being more and like keeping up with the rat race. But all of that just keeps us further and further away from the deepest aspects of what makes us human, and that's the deep connection with one another. We're social beings. We're born to bond. And you give an infant choice between food and bonding or love, it'll choose bonding every time. We're more born to bond than anything. And the speed of our cultures is stressing those bonds more and more all the time. And I think we're also in a massive flux in every sector. So it's destabilizing. And when people are destabilized, they tend to get scarce in their mindset and contract, as opposed to stay in a sense of abundance and cooperation and connectivity. And so I think crisis brings out the best of us and the worst of us and all of us. So we're all doing our work as best we can in order to be able to put our oxygen mask on first, in order to be most supportive and therefore able to help others do the same and be fit for service in that way.
So we identified that there's two problems going on. There are people that are doing the work. What, in your opinion, is like the fully integrated, healthy, holistic human? So if we could say it, we set up almost like an archetypal or a prototype of human that's like, this is what a really well calibrated human being looks like.
Sounds a little off.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Okay. So what do you think like a fully integrated whole human being and their highest potential actually looks like? What is that archetype look like?
Yeah. Well, I mean, if we see it in its fullest expression, we see that the avatars of our contemporary time. And those people like Martin Luther King, Gandhi, Jesus, Mother Teresa, being as embodied as possible, because we're all humans, so we're all going to continue to go through our stuff, and as fit for service as possible. The living example of our highest evolution, which is ultimately working towards greater and greater states of unconditional love. And what does that look like in action, like in a day-to-day experience? And at times, I think we can exalt those as being different from us. Like, oh, that thing that's happening, that's not achievable for me. I'm just going to stay in my kind of small little bubble or confined to my own perceived limitations. But all those things are available to us as well. And each of those people I mentioned, and countless others, countless teachers in that same kind of arena, went through their own process too. One of my heroes too is Ram Dass, who wrote Fierce Grace. And he said that before he got stroked, like stroked by God, before his stroke, everything was just practice. Everything he was teaching was just practice. When he got stroked is when, the real work began. And so all of those avatars, so to speak, those living teachers, those living lineage holders, the Buddha, right? Those were like the inception points of massive revolutions in human consciousness. They all had their own process of deep suffering that they were able to get right with. And that's our opportunity. I think our suffering is our best teacher. And we are so used to trying to numb it in our society, quick fix it, not do the work, not get deep and messy if that's what it takes. And I personally am a fan of doing that. It doesn't mean that I think everybody's ready to have a medicine experience, because you have to do a lot of preparation. And even when you've done preparation, some people, it doesn't work well with their neurochemistry. So there are other tools and accelerated technologies to catalyze consciousness. I just happen to believe personally that the medicine work, when it's facilitated well, is the safest, most efficient, and effective methodology for helping us get current with who we are and more clearly able to identify who we want to be and how we want to give back in that good way. So that fully integrated person, I also think on body, mind, heart, and soul. Are they functioning physically vital? Right? Because this is a body temple where one body in this one precious life, how do I get to choose to treat it? What do I feed it? Do I know where my food comes from? Right? I was a raw vegan for 5 years, and I gave away all my guns, all my fishing gear. I didn't think I'd ever kill anything again. I just got back into hunting again because I realized raw veganism over 5 years didn't work for me, and I needed to bring meat back in just to be vital, to be able to speak with energy. And so, but then I was getting meat from other sources, and I didn't always know where it was coming from. So I figured, well, if I want to be part of the full circle, then I'm going to hunt again. And I want to know where my meat comes from, and I want to be able to identify the source, and I want to have reverence for that practice and that engagement and that transmission and the receiving of life force energy. So I think of body, mind, heart, and soul. So we're integrated on all level, and then we're integrated within each of those levels into the most codified, coherent, and clear conscious self that we can be in this one life.
Well, that's extremely well put. That's definitely something to strive for, and as you know, we're all working towards that. That's ourselves. It's ongoing game. And of course, you'll be working with the Fit Service Mastermind with Aubrey this year, as I will be. We're going to be in the same space with a bunch of people on that same mission. So it's going to be an exciting year for that, for sure. Is there anything else that you would like to get out there today?
I think we've covered a great swath. It was like boots on the ground. What do we do day to day? How do we make these programs and systems and centers thrive? And then what's the meta position? Like, what's our meta view with our vision and towards the heavens? Like, what is the limit of my perception of myself? What's the ceiling that I've artificially constructed or adopted from somebody else? Who can I become when those limitations are released? And how do I get there? Who do I also need to call in for accountability and support to help me make sure I'm making progress? Because just because somebody wants to be a star or a musician or like whatever doesn't mean they're necessarily going to make it. So it's helpful to have our, like my teacher would say, heads in the heaven, but our boots on the ground at the same time. So I think we've covered a pretty good range. Like we were talking about before, I may be in Vancouver in February, so we potentially could have a part 2 conversation then.
I think we should have a part 2 conversation. We'll have no technical glitches throughout that, so we have a perfect setup for interviews. And so I'm really excited to get to meet you in person and have a deeper dive maybe in some things we touched on today. So thank you so much for taking the time. This has been awesome. People want to reach out to you through drdanengle.com or there's fullspectrummedicine.com. Any other websites that are under your umbrella?
ReviveCenters.com is our center here in Denver. And the concussionrepairmanual.com.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Andy, good to be with you, brother.
Yeah, thank you so much. I really appreciate it and look forward to seeing you in Vancouver.
Sounds good, man. Definitely.